You asked me what happens if someone isn't really dead before we shut the furnace door. I wish I didn't have an answer. The screen is black when I say that. All you hear is a slow, rough exhale through a vent. Then a second one. Steady, wet, wrong. Text would pop up if this were a video. This is the sound of a dead man. 4 hours after he died. I work nights at a small crematory outside Columbus, Ohio. Not because I like the quiet. I do it because night shift pays an extra $3.25 an hour. My wife's chemo meds do not care what time I sleep. I am a cremation tech. That is the fancy way to say I move dead bodies into very hot rooms. Paperwork, steel fire fragments. That is the job. If you have ever worked nights around the dead, you know this part. The room only feels safe when every sound stays exactly the same. Fan hum, cooler compressor, light buzz. Anything new means a problem. That night was a Tuesday. The kind of Tuesday you forget. No storm, no power issues. Just a full board of names and case numbers. The prep room was at 72 degrees. We log it every shift. OSHA loves numbers, so does the state inspector. 72 keeps the staff comfortable and the smell under control. The charging beer sat in the center of the room. Stainless steel. Rollers smooth from years of weight. I had wiped it down with Cavicide an hour earlier. No streaks, no residue. Just metal and gravity. The retort sat behind it. That is the furnace if you are not in the business. Refractory brick walls, gas jets, secondary chamber for the emissions. The control panel showed the preheat cycle climbing. 900, 1200, up towards 1600 degrees Fahrenheit. We never load cold. That is one of those details you do not find on Google. A warm chamber makes the process cleaner. Less smoke, more predictable times. Less for neighbors to complain about. I had the clipboard in my hand. Case ID, full name, date of birth, date of death, weight in pounds. 182, no pacemaker. That was circled twice. A defib unit in the chamber can turn the whole thing into a pipe bomb. The toe tag matched the paperwork. I checked that twice. I always check twice. A mix-up would shut the place down. I unzipped the bag on the gurney. You never know what you're going to see when you do that. Some families say peaceful. They lie more than the paperwork does. This one looked organized. That is the word that came to mind. Male, late 40s, good build, no obvious trauma on the face, jaw strap in place, cotton in the nose, hands folded because someone thought that looked nicer. Cause of death on the form was cardiac arrest. That is a broad way of saying heart stopped and we did not keep it going. Usually those chests look worked over. CPR bruises, rib fractures. Sometimes the sternum looks caved in. This chest did not. No bruising, no swelling. The skin over the ribs looked untouched. My brain flagged it as odd, then pushed it aside. Doctors signed the certificates, not me. I pulled the sheet back down, zipped the bag to mid-chest. You never zip over the face before the last ID check. That is another quiet rule we have. I moved to the chart and logged the time. 9:37 p.m. Then I did the implant check. No mechanical valves, no orthopedic rods, nothing that would outlast the bone. The exhaust fan kicked on overhead. Same fan, same motor, always the same pitch, always that smooth, steady draw of air out of the room. When I unlocked the wheels and started rolling him toward the retort, the fan changed. Just half a note. Lower, heavier. It sounded like it was pulling against resistance. I stopped the gurney, waited, listened, and went back to normal. High hum, even draw. My head logged it as a hiccup in the motor. Old building, old parts. But it was the first time that fan had ever changed tone when I moved a body. That was the first hairline crack. I lined the gurney up with the charging beer, locked the wheels, transferred him over. 1, 2, 3. Small shove. Weight slides from one set of rollers to another. That feeling never changes. I stepped back and looked at him. I do that with every case. Final visual. Face, chest, hands. Any sign I missed something. His mouth was slightly open under the jaw strap. That happens. Mandible relaxes, tongue drops, air pockets move. I tried to tell myself that. I hit the button to open the retort door. You can feel the hydraulics through the floor. Heavy hinge. Brick adjusting to open space. A faint wave of dry heat rolled out into the room. The panel read 1540 degrees and climbing. The interior looked normal. Brick darkened by years of use. No flame yet. Just stored heat. I released the brake on the beer, pushed the body forward. Rollers carried him into the mouth of the chamber. Head first, feet near the threshold, standard position. I stopped when his shoulders cleared the lip. We never shove all the way in until the door is ready to close. You do not want metal catching on metal when things expand. My hand found the locking bar, long, solid piece of steel across the front of the door. I had grabbed that bar 1,000 times. It always felt the same. Cold, slightly textured from years of gloves. I pulled the beer brake, the wheels locked, no movement, body in place, door ready to shut. I took one last look at the control panel. Preheat only. Burners still off. Chamber sealed except for the open door. I swung the door closed. Brick met brick. Metal met metal. The latch caught. That is when it happened. In the 2 seconds between the latch catching and my hand reaching for the ignition switch, I heard a sound from inside the chamber. It was not the fan. The fan is high and thin. This sound was low, in the chest range. It was a soft, wet gasp, air pulling through fluid, short, dragged, timed with my own breath without meaning to. I froze. My hand hovered over the switch. My lungs stopped on the next inhale. I waited, listened, nothing. The fan hummed. The cooler compressor clicked on in the back room. The overhead lights buzzed. The command panel ticked as numbers climbed by 1 degree. I told myself what we always tell ourselves. Bodies make sounds, gas moves, muscles twitch, fluids shift. Even in a closed system, what is left inside can still rearrange itself. We have a phrase for it here. Last arguments. The dead argue with gravity one more time. Sometimes with gas, sometimes with bone. You do not call the medical examiner for a single noise. Not if you want to keep your job. They sign the papers. We follow them. But I did not press the ignition switch. I want you to understand that part. There was no rule stopping me. The paperwork was complete. The time of death had been called 4 hours earlier at a hospital 10 miles away. He had a tag. He had a certificate. He had a chamber. And still my hand would not move. Working around the dead changes how you think about certainty. You get used to the idea that life has a schedule. Heart stops, body cools, rigor sets in, rigor fades, livor fixes. Cremation finishes the rest. It is a checklist. It is not supposed to bend. Every now and then, something bends it. I told myself the gasp was trapped air. Probably from the stomach, maybe the lungs. Maybe someone bagged him too fast. Maybe they moved him before all the compression stopped. I told myself all of that, step by step, out loud under my breath. But there was a detail I could not put back in the box. Cardiac arrest with no chest trauma. Fan tone dropping when I rolled him in. And now a single wet inhale from a chamber that was not yet sealed. That was the second crack. People who work near the dead share one thing. We all have at least one moment where something violates what we know biology should do. We do not like talking about those nights. Most of us never do. The timer on the control panel beeped. It wanted a decision. Start cycle or abort. I stood there with my hand over the switch. Fan humming. Door sealed. 182 pounds of signed-off human flesh waiting inside a brick oven at 1560 degrees. I told myself I was wasting time. I told myself no one would believe me, even if I heard it again. And then right when I pulled my hand back to finally hit the ignition, the exhaust fan dropped half a note. Just like before. Heavier. Lower. The room did not change. The numbers did not change. But the world for me did. That was where the first fracture really started. And it did not stay small for long. Not everything that stops breathing stays still. You asked why I hesitated before pressing the ignition. I never told you everything. I was still standing at the control panel, one hand hovering over the green start button. The chamber behind me sat in preheat mode, holding a steady 410 degrees, nowhere near cremation temperature. Preheat is just a warm-up cycle to dry out the refractory brick and prevent spalling when the burner fires. It should have been silent, except for the low hum of the intake fan. Instead, I heard it again. A wet, uneven inhale. Then a thick, blocked swallow. Not loud, not dramatic, just wrong, like a throat that hadn't learned it was done breathing. My first reaction was procedural. Always go back to the checklist when my gut disagrees with my ears. I logged the decedent's ID, confirmed no pacemaker, verified the dental chart matched the file, cross-checked weight 186 pounds against the expected burn time, everything normal, everything dead. But my hand wouldn't drop onto that button. I'd heard postmortem noises before. Gases pushing through collapsed tissue, fluids redistributing as rigor loosened. But those were pops, creaks, and gurgles. This was inhale, pause, swallow. A rhythm, a pattern. Bodies don't pattern anything after death. I walked back to the chamber door, gloved up, and placed my palm flat on the metal. The surface was cold. Preheat cycles shouldn't radiate yet. The solenoid valve was still closed. No flame, no expansion. Cold was expected. But one spot wasn't. A circular patch about the size of my hand pulsed with warmth. Warm metal directly where the lungs would sit if the body were positioned correctly. Warmth requires energy transfer. There was no energy source. I took my hand away, waited, placed it again. Still warm. I pressed harder. The warmth didn't fade. It wasn't residual heat. It was active, persistent. The chamber had a single observation window 3 inches wide, reinforced with thermal glass. I leaned in and looked. The interior should have been dry brick. Instead, the glass fogged from the inside. Condensation. You don't get condensation in a sealed chamber unless moisture is being released. Moisture is released by breath. I wiped the glass. Stared. The fog returned, then streaked down into 4 parallel lines, evenly spaced like something had dragged fingers across it, from the inside. I stepped back. Bodies twitch, fluids shift, gas expands, but they don't reach out and mark glass. I forced myself back into training mode. Rule number 1, never assume intent where physics might apply. I pulled up the burner log on the panel. No ignition, no pilot light, no airflow. The fan was in idle. The chamber was sealed. 0 variables. I keyed the night manager on the intercom. Hey, I need a second check on retort B. Something's off. He didn't come down. He didn't even pause his typing. You're hearing pre-flow. Hit the cycle. Go home. His voice didn't even bother hiding the dismissal. Pre-flow gas has a hiss, a clean directional push. It doesn't inhale. I said, there's movement. He chuckled. Bodies do that. Gas pockets. Don't make it weird. People who don't work nights around the dead laugh at the wrong things. Those of us who do, we know when the noise in the room isn't ours. I clenched my jaw, first crack in my tone all night. I hated how it felt. I checked the chamber pressure gauge. 0.0 psi. A sealed unit should hold stable pressure. If anything was expanding inside, it would rise. If anything was burning, it would spike. There was no movement on the dial, yet something inside was pushing enough air to fog the glass. Biology and mechanics were disagreeing. One of them was lying. I ran my fingertip across the metal again. The warm patch was hotter now, 96 degrees by touch. Body temperature. That isn't guesswork. Anyone who handles remains daily knows the difference between warm metal and warm flesh through metal. I felt a tiny vibration under the warmth. A pulse. Not random, not sporadic. 18 beats per minute. Slower than a living adult, but patterned. I pulled my hand away. My breath hitched, just once. Small. Enough that I noticed, enough that I hated. I opened the file again. Time of death, 4:11 p.m. Autopsy waived. Cause of death, cardiac arrest. Liver noted posterior. Rigor present but loosening. Nothing unusual. Then reveal buried at the bottom, possible cataleptic episode noted by EMS. Cleared by attending physician. Catalepsy. The old horror. The Victorian nightmare. The reason safety coffins once had bells. Not a diagnosis. A dismissal. The hum behind me shifted tone. The intake fan deepened like it was compensating for resistance. Fans do that when something pushes back. I went still. Breathing is a diaphragm contracting downward, expanding the chest cavity. It requires a neurological command. A dead nervous system issues no commands. The inhale behind the door came again, wetter than before. More force, like fluid obstructed the airway. A death rattle played forward instead of backward. My training snapped into place. If there was the slightest chance someone was alive, protocol required manual verification. But the body was sealed. Chamber engaged. Opening mid-cycle risked damage exposure and job loss. My thumb hovered over the emergency abort latch. If I pulled it, I needed to write an incident report. And I'd become that tech. The one who panics at corpses. A drop of condensation rolled down the window, then another, then four. Four again. Parallel. Same spacing, not drifting, not random. Repeated. Patterns don't belong to dead things. I keyed the manager again. There's biological activity. He sighed. No, there isn't. You're not here. You don't need me there. I stared at the fogged glass. No one believes us, I whispered. It slipped out before I could stop it. The words felt heavier than the air. He said nothing. The line went dead. The vibration pulsed again under my palm. Stronger, faster, 22 beats per minute, accelerating. I checked the O2 sensor. It flickered from 0.0 to 0.4 for 1 second, then back down. Impossible. The chamber had no intake. If oxygen rose, something inside was exchanging gas. Taking air, releasing air, breathing. I felt it before I heard it, and the warmth intensified, radiating outward in a circle like a handprint expanding. The breath inside deepened. Slow inhale, short exhale, not frantic, controlled, intentional. Bodies don't get intentional. My frustration snapped. This isn't gas, I muttered. Too loud. More emotion than I wanted. I forced my voice flat again. I popped the latch. Only a fraction, less than an inch. If there had been pressure, air would have rushed inward. Air rushed outward. Cold, not warm, not decay. Cold like a room that hadn't accepted heat yet. The breath on the other side sharpened into a wet, choking gasp, the sound of someone trying to clear fluid from their airway. I knew that sound. I'd heard it in hospitals. I'd heard it when people fought sedation. A throat refusing silence. I stepped back. The inhale came again. Louder, stronger. Like the lungs were finding rhythm. I realized the chamber wasn't echoing sound. It was transmitting it. The bricks conducted the vibration through the metal. I could feel the pattern in my bones. Then something hit the door from the inside. Not hard, not violent, just deliberate. A push. My gloved hand was still close. The metal flexed under the impact. My fingertips tingled from the vibration. My breath stuttered. Just once. Enough that I heard it. I closed the latch. My hand shook once before I stopped it. Dead muscle doesn't coordinate impact. Dead lungs don't inhale. Dead throats don't swallow fluid. The room hummed. The pulse under the metal synced with it, like the chamber and the body were sharing a rhythm. You don't get rhythm without a command. I looked at the button again. Start. One press would ignite the burner. One press would erase doubt. One press would destroy whatever was inside. If this was just gas, I was wasting time. If it wasn't pressing that button wasn't a procedure. It was murder. Something inside exhaled a long, ragged release. I felt it in my teeth. The warm spot throbbed once more. Then the inhale returned deeper than any before. I stepped back. This wasn't artifact. This wasn't random. It was breath. And breath meant battle. The pulse under my palm lined up with mine, just for a moment. Then it broke rhythm as if refusing synchronization, as if asserting its own tempo. My voice felt like it belonged to someone else when I spoke. Not everything that stops breathing stays still. You heard me say it wasn't gas. I didn't tell you what happened when I opened the door. I cracked the chamber no more than an inch. That was enough. The beer rolled forward by itself, metal wheels clicking against the track. It shouldn't move unless I pushed. Gravity doesn't act sideways. The interior glowed a dim orange from the preheat bricks. Not flame, just thermal readiness. The temperature was 410 degrees, not nearly hot enough to burn, but warm enough to show silhouettes. That's when I saw it. The ribs lifted slow, steady, controlled. A pause. Then they fell. Not twitching, not slumping, breathing. My mouth went dry. Breathing requires diaphragmatic contraction. Diaphragm requires neurological signal. A corpse doesn't signal anything, not after 4 hours, not after cardiac arrest. I stepped back. My knee hit the metal cabinet behind me. The sound echoed too loud in the empty room. The inhale came again, longer, deliberate, the kind of breath someone takes when they're conserving what little air remains. I slammed the latch shut. The hum in the walls died. The exhaust fan stopped. The silence felt physical, like it pressed against my ears. The metal of the furnace door pinged soft, sharp taps like knuckles testing it from the inside. I went straight to the intercom. Retort B is showing activity. The night manager sighed over the speaker. Gas expansion. You're tired. It's breathing, I said. You're hearing what you expect to hear. I'm seeing rib movement. Bodies settle. Settling doesn't inhale. He didn't respond. This is the thing nobody tells you. People who don't work with the dead will always treat certainty like hysteria. No one believes us. That sentence came out without permission. Too loud. Too honest. I swallowed hard and reset my tone. I hit the emergency halt. Protocol says, if there's any possibility of life, you stop everything. Paperwork doesn't matter. Time of death doesn't matter. One breath overrides all of it. I called the county medical examiner. He arrived 38 minutes later, still in his coat tie, crooked, irritated to be awake. He asked 0 questions before opening the chamber. You halted a scheduled burn, he said. Explain why. Biological activity. That's vague. I saw respiratory motion. He gave me the look, the one professionals reserve for amateurs. Then he pulled a rib spreader from his kit. A real one, ratcheting arms, padded grips, hardened steel. He didn't hesitate. He opened the chest cavity with mechanical calm. No gush, no blood. Just tissue that no longer circulated. He angled the light. The lungs were flat, completely collapsed. No residual air pockets, no perfusion. Dry tissue, deflated like bags that never held air. He flipped the heart with 2 fingers. It slid easily. No coagulum. Chambers empty. No fluid slosh, a hollow organ. He stared at me over the cavity. Explain to me, he said, how lungs with no air exchange can breathe. 8 words. Surgical. Weaponized. My jaw clenched. I didn't answer. He repositioned the ribs with the spreader. This man was dead. Whatever you heard wasn't respiration. The furnace door pinged again. We both turned. The panel lit for a second. The O2 reading spiked 0.0 to 0.6, then dropped. The burners were off. Intake closed. Chamber sealed. He frowned. That shouldn't be possible. That's why I called you, I said. He didn't reply. He signed a form. Pronounced. Proceed. Dismissed. He left without looking back. I stood in the silence and felt something fracture inside me. Not fear, not panic. Something worse certainty turned into isolation. I opened the door again. The beer slid out farther. The sheet over the face brushed against the metal. I froze. Fabric doesn't generate moisture on its own. I touched the sheet with 2 fingers. Damp, not soaked, not decaying fluid. Damp like someone had exhaled through cloth. Condensation formed where a mouth would be. I stepped back so fast my heel scraped the floor. The sound echoed like accusation. I radioed the manager again. He didn't answer. I checked the monitors. He'd clocked out. I was alone. Every room with the dead becomes hostile the moment you realize you might be wrong about what dead means. The furnace door pinged a 3rd time. Harder. Like the taps were getting confident. I snapped. This isn't settling, my voice cracked. Anger, not fear. That was my frustration moment. I swallowed it back down. I pulled the beer completely out. The wheels squealed. The body shifted. The sheet slid an inch. The ribs rose again. This time higher. This time faster. This time like the lungs expected resistance. I stumbled backward, hit the wall. Cold concrete against my spine. My breath shook once, just once. Enough to register. The corpse's breath paused like it listened. Then the exhale came. Wet, thick, directed, not random gas, not decay. Someone trying. That was the worst part. Not what it did. Why it did it. Something inside that body fought to stay. Respiration requires energy. Movement requires ATP conversion. ATP requires oxygen. Oxygen requires flow. No exchange, no motive force. Yet breath persisted. Engineering can fail. Biology doesn't improvise. The ribs lifted a final time, then collapsed. Stopped. Everything stilled. I waited. 10 seconds. 20, 30, nothing. I covered the body, logged the halt, resigned on paper. My badge deactivated at 2:17 a.m. I walked out without gloves, without clearance, without answers. They called me unstable. Said I'd panicked, said I'd confused gases with respiration. They rewrote the incident report. Weeks passed. Then I got the environmental log in the mail. No return address, just data. It showed 32 seconds of rising CO2 inside a sealed retort. No burners, no intake, no leaks. CO2 doesn't rise without exhalation. There was one more file attached, a medical note. One sentence blacked out, except the last 2 words suspected catalepsy. If someone wakes up inside a chamber built to end consciousness, we don't call that survival. We call it paperwork. They said it was gas. They always say it's gas. That explanation keeps them sane. But gas doesn't warm metal in the shape of lungs. Gas doesn't fog glass like breath. Gas doesn't leave condensation where a mouth fought fabric. Some things don't stop breathing. They just run out of time. And not everything that stops breathing stays still. If you heard something tonight that shouldn't be possible, Don't keep it to yourself. Like the video so the algorithm knows we're not the only ones who noticed. Share it with someone who thinks the dead can't move. Watch what they say after they hear that breath. Subscribe if you want the next case. I still have logs nobody has explained, and I'm not done talking. And tell me in the comments, was that breathing? Or was it something else, pretending it didn't end? I'll read every theory. I don't get answers from the living anymore.